Our first big step in the history of psychology is with the ancient Greeks. We were probably, as a species, struggling with all of these sorts of existential questions about consciousness and our mind before then, and also with learning, memory, basically everything we talk about in psychology before then. But our first records that we really talk about, in psychology at least, comes from the Greeks. So the first person I'll talk about is Socrates. I'll give you his views that are relevant to psychology before giving you a little bit of the tea on his life and what happened to him, because it's kind of interesting. So Socrates was a dualist. He thought that the mind and the body were separate, so remember, two birds, and he believed that the mind lived on after death. This is very similar, or you can basically look to any of the Greek mythology as a dualist view on the world. He also believed that knowledge was innate. What this means is that you were born with all of the knowledge that you needed for life. You just had to discover it as you grew up. Okay, so now for a little bit of the tea on the man. Socrates was a bum. He was from a working class family, but he was concerned more with ideas than with real-world concerns like money, housing, appearance. He just sort of wandered the streets picking fights. He was very anti-establishment. He walked Athens actually picking fights with people. It was more philosophical fights than physical fights, but not everybody really took kindly to having their belief system attacked by this bum. He had a very humanistic orientation. He wanted people to live better lives, which is why he was going up and sort of harassing people, trying to get them to think through why they were living the way they were, and wanted them to live better and live more effectively, because, he was basically a self-help guy before we really had that term. You can sort of sum up the Socratic school of thought as know thyself. He thought that self-knowledge was vital to virtue. If you could sit there and analyze your own thought patterns and figure out your flaws and improve those flaws, that was the best way to live your best life. And really, if you go down any self-help book section in any bookstore, that's the summary of a lot of them. The Socratic method, then, is that truth is known through systematic thought, and you achieve the systematic thought by questioning everything. Well, kids are good at this. You tell them, okay, so the sky's blue.
Why is the sky blue?
Well, the sky's blue because of the Rayleigh Scattering and blah, 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 blah.
What's that?
Okay, well, if you want to talk about Rayleigh Scattering, then it's a physics thing, and you are at the extent of my memory of when I took physics many years ago.
How come?
It's just this constant barrage of questions that really force you to know or to take an assessment of what you know and what you don't know, and then you can address that. And the honest bottom line for this, if you're a philosophy student, you're probably familiar with this, everything we know about Socrates is what Plato wrote of him. And we'll talk about Plato next. But Socrates wasn't necessarily concerned with writing things down. He was out there being the self-help guy, trying to get people to question their beliefs, question their lifestyle. And Plato was his student and went around, writing it down, talked about the Socratic method, all of these things. Okay, so Socrates, being very anti-establishment in Athens and picking a lot of fights with some influential people, it wasn't very well tolerated. He was brought up on charges of corrupting youth and atheism because of his questioning, the status quo of the day. He fought back in court, but he lost. He was sentenced to death in 30 days, but back in those days, it wasn't that you had to stay around and die. The officials were hoping he would just leave, go be somebody else's problem. But true to his moral view on the world, he stayed. They sentenced him to death, so be it. So in true Socratic fashion, he was given hemlock to drink, which is toxic. And in his death, he is reported to have walked around describing how it felt. You can just imagine the mental willpower it would take to be suffering a poisoning death and describing everything that you're experiencing as you go through it. Basically, he martyred himself for his intellectual beliefs. And we don't see that same thing follow through for his followers necessarily. Alrighty, subscribe to the channel for more pint-sized psychology. You can support me and this channel through Patreon or directly with paypal.me. Links for both are in the description box below. And remember, it's always a wonderful day for psychology. Bye!